Welcome to the Reclaim Leader podcast. I'm Jason Tucker.
And I'm Jesse Skiffington.
We're two pastors in the trenches who are passionate about church health for greater gospel impact.
We share the ups and downs of ministry, strategies that worked for us,
and some that didn't.
Best practices and practical tools for church leadership.
The goal, to help all of our churches flourish. Let's get started.
See another sunrise, sing a little song.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Reclaim Leader podcast. Jesse, it's good to be with you again. And Jesse and I, we just got back not that long ago, about a week ago, from a conference where we both were seen in the same place at the same time.
Very unusual these last 5 years, Jason.
Crazy. It's crazy that it's been that long since we hung out in person, but it was so good. We were at the fellowship community gathering, and Jesse taught a workshop for us, which was awesome. And we're actually going to share that workshop over the next 2 episodes. Thought it'd be really good to broaden it and let everybody hear. It's all about how do you ask the right questions when you are leading innovation or change. And I think innovation is maybe a scary word for some, but it just means when you ask the right questions, it leads to possible solutions that maybe you haven't thought of before. And that really is the secret to kind of moving things forward, as in any organization, but especially in a church in such a time as this.
Yeah, I think that's right. And so maybe we spoil the end and then we'll get into some of the content. But You know, innovation is, I think it's a little intimidating because you're thinking, man, novel idea, something nobody's ever heard of. Well, listen, there's nothing new under the sun, right? There are variations of the things that we've already done. And I think sometimes, though, you have to think in terms of it. We're not just looking to tweak something. We're actually looking to create something different that moves us in a new direction. So that's kind of what this conversation is about, to go from, not just making something that already exists better or improving it, but to think of something new that you want to try to do together. And so I define innovation, and really innovation and change go together. So change in the church, or innovation, as where a culture of ideas meets a track record of follow through and a well-defined problem. So when you have lots of ideas and you've tried lots of things, you start to get clarity around what works, what doesn't work. And you get used to, as a group, as a congregation, of taking risks and trying things and seeing what happens. And it kind of loosens everything up. It kind of loosens the soil for good things to happen. And so we're going to walk through this a little bit. But the idea is to help churches generate good thinking around the things they want to try in order to be healthy, flourishing congregations. And a lot of that lines up with what one of the other speakers, Caitlin Wood, was sharing about, kind of thinking of the whole system of the church as a plant, as a gardening exercise, from the soil to the seed, all the way to the fruit. And so we're talking about change and innovation in kind of the whole context. And you might pick one aspect of the plant to work on, or the whole thing. But good questions can help us to make progress. So we're going to get into all that today. Yeah, so good. And I probably should ask this before we hit record, but do you think we'll be able to make your slides available to our listeners? We can, yeah. In fact, some of the folks at the conference asked for my slides, and I am sure I have it. But I went from the conference to vacation in California, and so I have the list of people who signed up to get slides. I need to send them out, but yes, I'd love to make them available for
awesome. Probably the easiest way to do it then is we'll send them automatically to our subscribers. So if you're not a subscriber, you'll get it for free, but you can subscribe. Just go to our website, reclaimleader.com, and it'll say at the top, newsletter. Just subscribe to the newsletter. You'll get the slides or access to the slides automatically. So we'll make sure that we do that for you. It's so good, Jesse, getting away, even though, I was kind of part of leading it. Mm-hmm. It felt so good to get away because you get perspective and you're thinking about, all of a sudden, like, all the creative juices start flowing.
Sure.
I just want to encourage pastors out there, if you haven't taken a break in a while or gotten together and gotten some content in that way, going to a conference or a retreat or something, even if it's just like a workshop one day where you can kick around some ideas, I'm telling you, the perspective helps. It helps get you out of that.
And one of the things that we're going to talk a little bit about is how having colleagues that are in the same world that you're in, know the language, know the lingo, know the challenges, having the opportunity to just be together and lament some things, but also encourage each other. And then we were hanging out, I think maybe Tuesday night or whatever, and we were just having fun, and
That was
everybody's
awesome.
laughing, and we're just having a good time, and it feels good to do that and to be in a community. So yeah, I echo that. Take that time to engage with people, and maybe not let 5 years go by. We did have the excuse of a pandemic in there, but
and shout out to everyone in that crew. I think
yeah,
one way or
totally.
another, they're all connected with the podcast, so it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
We had David Kling, Robbie Yitterberg. They were both guests with us. Clint was there with us. Matt Pooley with us, and Caitlin joined us too. I mean, it was great. We had a great time. So
yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Again, man, so good. All right, so let's get to this idea of questions, because this isn't anything new. Everybody's heard, like, you have to ask the right questions.
That's right.
But you have to ask the right questions. So how does Jesse, I love how you frame it in terms of these sort of questions that we ask to get where we want to go. So let's just jump into it.
It's another way into the same conversation. You know, Bob Weitzel's helped us have this conversation. You've helped us have this conversation. So this is another way into that same sort of change-oriented, vision-oriented kind of conversation. And I think it really cuts right to the heart of our podcast, like why we started it. And we wanted to figure out how to lead change well in the local church. And I think it was our second guest ever. I think, right? Jim Mead was our second guest, if I remember right.
I think so. I got to go back and look. Bob was guest one. Jim might have been guest two.
I think that's right. So Jim was saying something to the effect that Jim was a seasoned pastor who came to work with me in the early days of my time here at Marine View. And he basically said something like, so you want to lead change in the local church? And I was like, yeah, we got to do this work. And the punchline back was something like, are you sure? Are you sure you want to do that? He of course believes in that good work of revitalization and change in the local church, but he also knows that for those pastors and church leaders who want to lead in that way, it's going to come at a cost, and that there will be some bumps and bruises, and you'll have, as Jim liked to say, you'll have the scars to prove it if you do it well. And so in the breakout, I told the story of a woman who I would consider to be a friend who has since passed away, and I would consider to be someone who made the journey through lots of change with us, but was pretty resistant at first. And I remember when our senior pastor, John, had retired, and we were making a lot of changes as I was the interim, and then stepped in as the senior pastor. And one of the changes, we changed the whole fellowship area right outside of the sanctuary. So we had a hallway. It wasn't really room for people to mingle and talk. And there was a next steps guest, like an information desk that was way too big and took up a lot of space. So we decided to tear a wall down in that on that floor of the church to open up that hallway into what was called the upper fireside room. It was the fellowship place. It was where coffee was served, but it was kind of tight, had a giant fireplace in there, and it wasn't arranged super well. And so the idea was tear the wall down and let's create a big open space, a third space for people to gather before and after the services. And so everybody was pumped. We went through that whole process with our leadership team, and did the whole construction. We tore down the wall, brought in all new furniture, got everything ready. And we were so excited to share what we had done with the whole congregation. And so I'll never forget, though, on that first Sunday, we were kind of revealing everything. Marge Grimm was one of the first people to walk through the door. And I saw her coming in. I was excited to show her what we had done.
Great name, by the way.
What's that?
Great name, by the way.
Oh, yeah, Marge Grimm.
Marge Grimm.
That's
Grimm. Classic.
Yeah. Yes. And she's one of the great older ladies in the church. And she walked in and she took a look around and she said, I hate this. Direct quote. I hate this. And it wasn't because what we had done was
Marge didn't beat around the bush.
She didn't beat around the bush. She just goes, man, so why is leading change so hard in the local church? Well, change is experienced as loss. I mean, I think if you haven't heard that before, if you need to be reminded of that, when you change something in the church, it might be for good reasons, the right reasons. It might be what needs to happen. But when you remember that change is experienced as loss, Marge's statement, although maybe perhaps a bit extreme, makes a lot of sense. She captures a lot of what is like everything else in the world is changing so rapidly, I can't keep up.
Yeah.
My church was the one place that was safe and stable, and I knew, and now you're changing that too. And I think that was what was really being expressed there. And over time, though, Marge would become a fan of it, an advocate of change, and someone who she's passed away, as I mentioned, but she became a real close friend of change in the church and supportive of the things we were doing. So, but it was an interesting journey to go on. And those early days of leading change, man, they kind of came at a cost, right? You have the bumps and bruises to prove it. So if you lead change, just fair warning. This was my little warning statement on the front end. You're going to have the scars to prove it, Jason.
Yeah.
You know that. I know that. We've lived that. We've taken unfair shots, maybe some fair shots from when we messed up, but it comes at a cost. And so just know that going in, but it's worth it to help a church get unstuck and to move towards greater flourishing and health. And I think it's important to kind of just, again, we're going to get to the questions here in a minute, but we got to set the frame a little bit. Why is it that we need to lead change in the church? Why don't we just leave things as they are if it's going to cause all this upset and changes, experiences, loss? Well, we had Todd Bolsinger on the podcast, I don't know, a couple years back. His book, Canoeing the Mountains, I think captures it really well. We're navigating uncharted territory. We haven't seen or experienced a post-Christendom, post-denominational, de-churched world before. And now we have to adapt and adjust to that. My friend Jim Singleton, he was on talking about discipleship, I think last year sometime.
Yeah.
And he says it this way. He says, we've never been this way before.
Yeah.
We got to change. We got to figure some things out. We have to adapt. And so I think one of the things the church needs to catch up to is really thinking in terms of making a pivot from thinking in terms of technical change to thinking in terms of adaptive change. And Jason, you and I talked a lot about this. There's a ton of books out there on this. But the conversation around technical change versus adaptive change really picked up speed in the mid to late 90s in the information age as things were changing so rapidly. What we discovered really is that the things that had worked and the expertise that we had gained over several centuries and even in our own experiences, because change was moderate over time, our expertise could keep up with the pace of change. And so we could be technically proficient at doing the things that we needed to do. But then when the pace of change picked up so rapidly, we can't keep up with that. We're not experts anymore in the same way that we once were. And so when we're thinking about technical change, you're thinking about applying current know-how, things that you already know how to do, and you're plugging that in. Caitlin uses that image. I love this one of like a mechanic. That's a technical change. The battery died, take out the old battery, put a new battery in, the car's running again. You have a flat tire, change the tire, your car's running again. And so I would say, we're okay at that kind of stuff. But when it comes to adaptive change or needing to apply new ideas that we haven't discovered yet, that's where we have to learn some new ways. We have to learn some new things. And our old expertise may not service the same way that it did. That was kind of Todd's point, right? In his book, Canoeing the Mountains.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think an example of this, pastors, you hear this in church all the time, or maybe if you're listening and you're not a pastor and you're just part of a local church, you hear this all the time where somebody presents a problem and the solution always seems to be something we did in the past.
Right. Something we know how to do, something that worked.
We know how to do it. We did it before. It worked once upon a time. And so then a lot of churches will be like, okay, let's run it back. Let's do it again like that. And it hardly ever has even close to the same impact because it's not designed for right now.
Yeah.
It's designed for a time that no longer exists. And so you have to
figure
figure out.
Yeah, learn new ways. That's that adaptive piece. And if you want some resources on that, Ron Heifetz, Marty Linsky, their books, Leadership on the Line, Staying Alive Through the Dangers of Leading, or something like that. I mean, that's powerful. And then their more academic work on that stuff was Leadership Without Easy Answers, and kind of captures the shift from technical change to adaptive change leadership and navigating all that stuff. So what's the work when it comes to technical change or technical fixes? It's applying current know-how. When it comes to adaptive work, it's learning new ways. And that's kind of where we are in a lot of respects. There are some things that are still going to work that we've always done, but a lot of things that aren't. So who does the work? And when it comes to technical change or technical fixes, experts or authorities do the work. When it comes to adaptive problems or adaptive change, the people with the problem do the work. And I think that's the exciting part, Jason, is that when it comes to this need to learn a new way and to come up with ideas that we haven't thought of before, we're the ones that are going to do the work. We have the right people, the gifts, the abilities, the mindset to ask good questions that are going to lead us to some new ways of doing and being the church. And that's what's exciting for me, because you don't need to have all the answers, but you can learn to ask good questions. And for me, that just takes the pressure off.
Yeah.
When we go from, I have to be the one to be the expert, I as the pastor, as the church leader, I'm the one who should know what to do. And we can let go of that, because really no one knows, right? God knows, right?
I'm not the guru, right?
Yeah, we don't have to be that subject matter expert, but we can be facilitators of really great questions that God can work through to lead us to some really great ideas and solutions for what we're facing. So open-ended questions are what we're going to talk about today, and focusing on open-ended questions that can help churches move towards greater flourishing, that can help us move towards an environments-based thinking, a culture-based thinking, to the whole system, like Caitlin likes to help us think about with the gardening image. Open-ended questions can help us think in those kinds of terms. So one other caveat before we jump into the first question, I would say is this, that there's no magic solutions, right? There's no one idea that you're going to come across that's going to fix all the problems.
Come on, Jesse.
I know. I'm sorry, Jason. I just had to put that out there. So no silver bullets.
You don't have any magic beans I could plant? Come on.
There's no, yeah, it would be nice. But we have God with us. We have the Holy Spirit building the church up in love. We have what God has given us in order to live out the mission that he has given us. So it's exciting. So let's get into our first question. We're going to look at just the first two, because and then part two of this, we'll look at the other five, and we'll go a little more quickly through those. But the first question is really just an open-ended question around, what's the problem you're trying to solve? There's a lot of things that you could pick across the whole system of your church. You could pick the whole system if you want, but that's a big one to tackle. So maybe you pick one thing, but what's the problem you're trying to solve? And when we asked that at the conference, it was awesome to hear so many different things people are working on. And there was a wide range when it was like, what are the problems that we're trying to solve? But there was a commonality across all of them too. You know, people are trying to find some ways forward for the church. And one of the ones that was kind of the most common thread, and we hear this all the time, is the problem we're trying to solve is, how do we reach young families? Right? Yeah. We hear that almost constantly. And so what's the problem about the problem? What's the problem that we're trying to solve? And what are some things that we're going to do about it? So what I want to encourage us to do is, when we identify the problem that we're trying to solve, or maybe a better, not better, but a different way of expressing that would be, what's the problem we're trying to address? There might not be a solution that's like perfect, but we're going to address something that moves us forward. So what's the problem we're trying to address? And say it is young families, and how do we reach young families? Well, then I would encourage you, don't just state the problem, really explore it. Take some time to ask lots of questions and to be curious about that problem. What makes it a problem? Why is it a problem? What does it matter for you to solve this problem? What's at stake for you? So explore the problem by asking as many questions as you can think of, and cultivate curiosity. So I don't know, Jason, what are some questions that come to mind for you when you think of this problem of how do we reach young families?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the questions I think of right away is, oftentimes people think the problems are the outcomes. Mm-hmm. They mistake those two. So it's not that we don't have young families. It's what has caused us to not reach young families. Yeah. What's behind that? Why?
Yeah, what's the problem behind the problem?
Exactly. What's the problem really?
Yeah.
Well, the problem really is we haven't done XYZ to translate the gospel to young families, or even provide opportunities for young families, or on-ramps for young families. We just sort of do things the way that we always do them. And we hope that we invite young families to come, but they don't stay because it's not connecting with them. Okay, well then what do we do about that? So for me, when I ask any question like that, but especially the young family question, is, why aren't they in the room already?
Yeah.
And why aren't they in the room already, really?
Yeah. And so open-ended question, right? So let's talk about what's causing them not to be here already. Yeah. And sometimes some of those are internal things. So what about the way that we gather and the way that we do church is getting in the way of that? What about the way that our world is going is getting in the way of that? What about their schedules? What about their, sports? What about their and ask lots of questions about the problem, because you're going to find probably that the problem that you begin with is not the one that you sort of end up articulating that really is the one that we can make some progress toward. So don't cheat this part. Don't just say we need to reach more young families. Well, really explore it. What's the problem with the problem? How is that problem related to your vision and your mission? The thing that God has given you uniquely to do. And, you know, at Marine View, our vision and mission statement, you know, it's nothing earth shattering. It's what everybody has, hopefully some version of, but ours is to be a flourishing church that makes disciples of Jesus Christ, right? That could be anything, but we want to be a healthy, vital, flourishing, thriving church that helps people to know and follow Jesus. So that's our vision. That's what we want to move toward. And our mission statement within that is how we're going to move toward that vision is to create environments where people are mobilized to go deeper with Jesus and to reach wider with his love, to grow in their love of God and grow in their love of their neighbor inside the church and the world around them. And so, so we go, okay, so how does this problem we're trying to solve relate to our vision and mission, the thing that God has given us to do? And I know when it comes to like the young families question, that's like baked into your vision and mission statement at Tower Hill, right?
It is our vision. So our mission to lead people into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. And our vision is we do that by becoming a church for all generations. Yeah. So we think that's the lens through which we view all the things we do as a church. How are we being a church for all generations? Which means how are we translating the gospel into each generational language, and how are we doing that well? Yeah. So bringing your vision and mission as a church into the questions that you're asking about the problem you're trying to solve, that has to be a part of it. Otherwise, it's disconnected from your direction and your purpose. So Marine View, the example I shared from our life together was we were trying to figure out how to be a multi-generational congregation that had a desire for different styles of worship music, had a hunger for Christian education. We needed to add a third service, but we didn't quite have enough people to do a third service. We were worried about if we did a third service, we'd become 3 different churches. We were already having a lot of division between our 2 services as far as just kind of becoming 2 churches within the church. We wanted to figure out what we were going to do with youth and kids on Sundays, and where does like fellowship and community building fit into our Sunday mornings? So we were asking lots of questions, but really the question was, what kind of environment do we want to create on Sunday mornings to facilitate our vision and mission? And we articulated within that problem some of these other things. Well, what about the environment do we want to set? What about the music styles? What about children and youth? What about education? And so we asked a lot of questions about the problem that help us understand all the various aspects, or a lot of the aspects of the problem that we were trying to solve. So when you explore the problem and you really try to kind of dive in and get to the heart of the problem and all the elements of the problem, that's where lots of, I think, the seed beds of really great ideas can come from that. So don't shortchange this part. Really explore the problem and ask as many questions as you can think of about the problem. And you're going to start to notice and see things about it that you hadn't before. And then, as I mentioned in the seminar, I'm sure people rolled their eyes after a little while. But when you think you've asked all the questions, you're not done yet. Ask one more question. And that question is, I don't know if you remember, Jason. Oh, I do.
Oh, what was it?
What else?
What else, right? Always ask, what else? What didn't we think of? Sometimes even pausing and saying, let's spend a moment in prayer and being quiet and listening for God to speak, listening for the Holy Spirit, and then coming back out of prayer and go, what else? What else did we hear? What else did we miss about the problem that we're trying to address here for the sake of the vision and mission God has given us? So first, what's the problem you're trying to solve? What's the change that you feel compelled to make, or the area that you want to see some change happen? What's the problem you're trying to address? That's the first question. But don't shortchange that one, Jason. Don't skip.
No, because everyone wants to jump immediately to the work, but you'll end up wasting a lot of time if you don't nail down what the actual problem is. Yeah. That's
right. So get clear about the problem. Ask as many questions as you can. And this is a little bit out of the coaching world, but try your very best just to drill into you, and maybe even write this down before you start meeting with people, or even before you open a yellow notepad just to explore it yourself. Open-ended. Start with what questions, what, how, what, because if we ask yes or no questions, would we like to have young families come more often to our church? Yes. Well, It's not a
The
very good
end.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah, the end, right? So open-ended, and that what else question just spurs on more brainstorming, more curiosity about the problem. So that's question one. Question two is related, but it's crucial that we get to this question as well. What's urgent about the problem you're trying to address or solve? What's urgent about and I would add, what's urgent and important about it? And I would say the importance and the urgency all tie back to the vision and mission, but what's urgent and important about the problem, and what makes it urgent and what makes it important? And again, when we're asking this question, we need to ask open-ended questions and really get curious about what makes this problem urgent and important for us. Why this problem and not some other problem? What makes this one the one that we want to tackle? And you've talked a lot about this, Jason, and so I've borrowed some from your good thinking around this in the breakout. But Dr. John Cotter, he urges us to think about urgency. And one of the things that he said is that most organizations fail to create sufficient urgency. We probably have a good idea of what the problems might be that we need to address or get traction on and to become a healthier system or healthier church. But we often fail to create sufficient urgency to make progress toward that or to create buy-in for change. And we'll get to that piece in the next segment. But creating urgency can be a challenge. I don't know. What other questions would you ask about urgency, do you think?
Yeah. So when it comes to urgency, I think maybe a place to start, this is where I usually start, is if you're the leader of the organization, or at least you're the facilitator, right? If you don't like the leadership word. I think you start with when you sort of figure out you want to make a change and it needs to be now. What's going on inside of you that makes you feel like it's urgent? Usually you get to some sort of passion where you feel like we don't have a minute to lose. We've got to figure this out now.
Gotta get it
and
done.
You in your heart and head know what these reasons are. I think this is just the stage of you unpacking your heart and head with the rest of the leadership so that they can see into how you're thinking. And 9 times out of 10, they'll be like, oh yeah, absolutely. Since you put it that way, that makes a lot of sense. Let's go. But I think it's just translating your own passion, the thing that you do intuitively when you feel like, hey, this is a priority, like right now. Well, why? And how can you articulate that in a way that other people can come along with you?
And even invite them in. One of the other parts that maybe this goes without saying is when you have an open-ended, adaptive approach, questions-based, we're going to solve this problem or work on this problem together approach, and you ask questions, everybody's participating. And there's no real wrong answer. I mean, there might be worse answers or better answers, but everybody gets to say something. And when you say, what's urgent about this problem? They might say something that you never thought of. And you go, that is urgent. I mean, you think about what kinds of things did you hear from, well, maybe you shared, but also that others said when you were working on how do we reach young families? What's the urgency about that? Well, there's a lot of urgency, but what is it? Let's think about what the urgency is. Why does it matter to us? And you'll hear a lot, sometimes the people that are maybe a little further down the road of the life, they're thinking about their grandkids or their kids who have drifted away from church. It's urgent because it impacts their real family in a real way. Or we're maybe thinking more big picture, like the de-churching stuff. We heard from Jim Davis and those guys talking about that. Maybe that's the urgency. We got to figure out how to reconnect with people that have drifted away. So what's urgent about the problem? What makes it urgent? What makes it important? Why this problem? Why not another problem? Why is this the priority? What will be gained if the problem is addressed? What will be lost if the problem is not addressed? Really mining down and brainstorming around those things. And when we're doing that and we create that urgency, I think we have to be a little bit careful. We don't want to be manipulative. But if we're only ever focusing on what the positive outcome will be from that change that we're recommending or the problem that we're trying to address, if we just focus on what can be gained, we're missing the other half of the conversation. It's sort of the what will be lost part if we don't get this right. And this is where Daniel Kahneman and his stuff. Daniel Kahneman's a social psychologist, but he won a Nobel Prize in economics of all things for his thinking on this stuff. But basically, in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and a couple other places, he talks about how the risk of loss is a greater motivator than the potential for gain. The
Yeah.
risk of loss is a greater motivator than the potential for gain. Why? Why would that be the case, Jason?
Yeah.
I think
I feel like it puts very clearly what the stakes are.
Yeah.
And you think about things like reaching the next generation. What are the stakes if we don't act? And I think this is something that has changed because of sociology. I think this has changed because when, let's say, my grandparents were in church, their thinking was, our kids, the children of the 60s, they left, but they'll be back. So I don't think for most churches there wasn't an urgency. It was just like, they'll come back, they'll come around, and that's
they'll get through their 20s, and when they have family, they'll be back.
And largely they didn't. The boomers didn't, as a generation, let's say, come back. Lots of boomers in churches, but that's a huge generation. So, and I think now we've seen what happens when you see the whole de-churching information. And I, by the way, recommend that book again. We're going to have Jim and Mike on the podcast
awesome. That's gonna be
here.
cool.
Yeah. So I'm going to reach out to them, and they said they'd love to be on. So we'll work that out. But in the data that they found of why people had stopped going to church, it's really interesting. Just generationally speaking, generations haven't come back on their own. And it's like, now's the time to act. Well, actually, 20 years ago was the time to act, but now we really can't wait another minute. And I want to say this just before we close this part, and that is sometimes churches, they don't mean it, but I think this comes from the real practical folks in the room, which you need, who sort of see church growth as the increase of necessary giving units. In other words, we're going to be a more stable church. We're going to be able to do more if we have more people giving, and that's true. But if that's what's driving you, I would just caution you and have you just kind of take a look at why are you doing what you're doing? Why does it matter to reach them? If it's not something like, because Jesus called us to reach this next generation and we got to do everything we can because that's our calling, because listen, young people don't give right away anyway, but the whole idea is it's a mission thing. Everything else will take care of itself. Don't let that be the driving force. I'll just kind of throw that out there.
I love it, Jason. And there has to be a gospel urgency that Jesus is the one that people need, right? So that's who we're here to bring. And so I hope that's assumed in this conversation. But if it's not, if you're thinking in terms of church maintenance and how do we keep the lights on, I think you got to do some kind of soul searching around that. I mean, it's practical, right? I get that part, but we're talking about the urgency of reaching the next generation with the good news about Jesus. So they have a foundation to build their lives from. So they have the security of knowing and being known by God and living a life empowered by the Holy Spirit. I mean, that's what we're after. And that's why we need healthy, flourishing churches from the soil that we're working with to the fruit that comes. So that's why we need good ideas. And that's what's at risk. Jim Collins in his book, Good to Great, he talks about a lot of things related to business. And if you've ever read that book, there's a lot of really helpful thinking around adaptive change and organizations that end up taking this leap from good to great. But he wrote this little addendum called Good to Great for the Social Sector. And he wrote it for nonprofits and churches. And his main purpose in doing that is because a lot of people like us were showing up to his conferences and trying to apply some of the things he had written in his book. And he came to realize that there is a greater motivator for nonprofits and churches than there is even for the business sector, because the business sector is all about the bottom line, profit, right? How much money did we make for our investors and whatever. But for the nonprofit and church world, it was all about the mission, something we believe deeply in that can impact and change people's lives for the better. And so for us to not feel urgency around becoming a healthier, more vibrant church, not being willing to risk a leading change and addressing problems and innovating where we can, I think we got some soul searching. Anyway, that was a little sermon. We didn't intend to preach here, but I love it. I'm glad that you mentioned that. But I think sometimes presenting the risk of loss helps people to get on board.
Yeah.
What will happen if we don't do this?
Yeah.
what will the outcome be if we don't risk this change, or if we don't address this problem, or if we don't make progress here? And again, another book I'd point to is Adam Grant. He wrote a book called Originals. He's written a handful of different things. Not a Christian. A lot of these guys are not Christian authors, so just know that going in. But they know how people think and whatever. And he talks about if we can help people to think in terms of what will be lost if we don't make that change, versus what will be gained if we do make the change. The risk of loss is a greater motivator. He says if you can present that right, or kind of maybe the way we would talk about it, is if we can ask the questions that help us get a sense of that around the urgency, then it becomes a risk not to change.
Yeah.
It becomes a risk not to do something. Whereas before it felt risky to do something or to try to change, now it feels risky not to do it. Because if we don't, this is what will be lost. And so I think just knowing that as part of the urgency conversation, what happens if we don't address this problem? And I think that just opening up and brainstorming around that question, what happens if we don't address this? And just seeing what comes out, seeing where people's heads and hearts go. And then I would encourage you, as we always do at the end of any question like this, stay curious. And when you think you're done exploring the urgency of the problem you're trying to address, then you're going to ask again, what else? What else makes this so urgent and important for us? What else about this problem is so important for us to figure out and make progress towards? So those are the first two. What's the problem you're trying to solve, address? Remembering that we're doing an adaptive work. We've never been this way before. And the second one, what's urgent about? Why does it matter? And what are all the aspects of that? Brainstorm around those two things.
I love it. Jesse, that's great. It's a good start. Okay, everyone. Hey, listen, we'll do part 2 next week. And until that time, we're rooting for you. And remember, if you subscribe to the newsletter, you'll get when Jesse does have the slides available.
I have them. They're ready.
We'll send them out and make sure that you get them. And, you're welcome to share them with your leadership as you talk about this stuff. I think it's a really helpful way of framing adaptive change conversations in your church. So, man, it's we're 100 miles an hour, Jesse.
There's a lot, Jason. That's fire hose.
It's good though. It's good. All good.
Yeah, I love it.
All right, but truth be told, I'm probably not going to tackle this till after Easter. So
that's right. Yeah, we all have full permission.
That's right. We're almost in Holy Week.
But really, isn't what we're talking about here just in some ways a way of thinking, a way of approaching the things that we're trying to do in the church? So just know that this is not like a one size fits all, like plug and play strategy. This is a way of a mindset that we want to take as we approach our problems. So anyway, there you go.
All right. Well, thanks everyone. As we always say, ministry is hard. It is so much better when we do it together. We'll catch you next time.